Wonderful. So I am Claire Hetzel, the CEO of Landcare Victoria, and I am really excited to spend this hour with you tonight to showcase some of the work that has happened by two amazing communities and Landcare collaborations and our partnership team over the last 12 months, and to talk about where we'll be going next as a project with the fantastic funding support from the Ian Potter Foundation and the Natural Resources Conservation Trust and Landcare Victoria. So before we go any further, I would like to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation and recognise that they have an amazing legacy of caring for country that goes tens of thousands of years beyond that of Landcare. But that Landcare continues that stewardship of land in a way that hopefully provides a great touch point for us all moving forward. So tonight is a webinar rather than a Zoom meeting, which is a little bit different, although hopefully after so many years post-COVID, it's familiar to most of you. So if you have a question that you would like to ask tonight, please use the Q&A kind of bubble button to be able to pop it in. And there's a kind of democratic voting process where you can do a thumbs up to move a question up if you think that's something you want the panelists in particular to focus on. The chat function is where we'll be able to pop some information from the panelist team as we go through the night. So you won't be able to unmute your microphone, but we will spend time at the end of tonight's presentation to hopefully answer questions that you've put into that Q&A function. So as I said, this is a particularly momentous moment because it's been 2 hard years of slog to get to being able to present 2 landscape plans that have been imagined in a project, but actually brought to life by 2 networks, one in North Central and one in the Golden Broken region. So the New Futures program has aimed to be a little bit different. It's a landscape scale planning project that is ultimately resourcing local communities to bring together stakeholders to their table, rather than what often happens in Landcare, which is Landcare being asked to participate in everyone else's planning processes. So it really has aimed to develop a community-led model for landscape scale planning, which is leveraging off an international framework called the 4 Returns Framework, which you can see here presented as 5 steps. And the difference is that we're trying to explore the opportunities at the landholder or farm scale and what those individual decisions mean when you start to aggregate them together at the landscape scale. So at Landcare Victoria, we strongly believe that a community-led approach can build off the existing amazing work that Landcare does across our state and in many landscapes, and ultimately to be able to bring together different types of land managers and stakeholders to find those points of shared priorities that ultimately start to create a cross-tenure approach to delivering outcomes at scale and addressing the challenges that we face. So it's not everyone who can bring that collection together and cross silos of areas of government policy work, but ultimately to travel real relationships that land in action on the ground at the decision points that private landholders and public land managers alongside traditional owners can make to deliver impacts at scale. So the New Futures program is exploring what we can unlock collaboratively to also explore how we potentially fund this endeavour. So where are the investment potentials that will support that multi-stakeholder action in a landscape? And I guess people might ask, well, why Landcare? And I would say is that Landcare is able to bring their private land managers to play in a way that other stakeholders who might undertake a landscape scale planning approach would be unable to do. And we can work across an entire landscape and we can work across a whole lot of different areas. Ultimately, it's also private landholders can make real in-kind contributions to a landscape scale change that we're going to need as we move forward into the future. So I'm really excited to hand over to Anthony to talk a little bit more about the program that we run for this first iteration of the New Futures program, but then to introduce some of the amazing local land carers who have guinea pigged this process to speak to what they've heard and learnt, And then to one of our partners, Andrew Wardy, at the Regen Farmers Mutual, to talk about some of our learnings, and then we'll kick off into that Q&A function at the end. Over to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Claire. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview of what we did this year with New Futures in practice, so a sort of version 1.0. And later on, we'll be talking a bit about the expression of interest process for round 2 of this program. And so I'm sure a number of you are on the webinar today to get more information about that. So we'll deliver a bit more about that after the Q&A session. So what did we do this year with our 2 amazing landscapes? So we had an incredible level of engagement with the Bull Oak Northern Grampians Landcare Network and their Windharp Horizons project, and the Granite to Goulburn network in around the Strathbogie and Longwood Plains area. So both landscapes had their working group form earlier this year to provide that leadership team to be supported by their landscape coordinator and engage with a whole lot of project partners, local stakeholders, and touch points with a pilot 10 landholder cohort who were looking at some of the individual opportunities on their properties, as well as what they could do collectively as a cohort. So on the screen, you'll see a bit of a visual summary of some of the key pillars of the program that both our landscapes undertook this year. So you can see that the content there and the process around New Futures is really designed to help build sufficient information and shared understanding for the landscapes to put together a landscape action plan. And also bring in the stakeholder engagement that is required to develop a shared vision and really, I guess, get to the nuts and bolts of what can be done in that particular landscape. So what stood out as some of the, I guess, strengths in the program this year? So the process that these landscapes went through really leveraged quite an incredible amount of stakeholder engagement. So both networks had private landholders and farmers, government agencies, other like-minded not-for-profits, traditional owners, who all came along the journey and also interfaced with a number of investors along the way to help deliver what are 2 quite robust plans. So, for example, the Granite to Goulburn group had over 15 stakeholder organisations participate during their process, as well as their really keen landholders. So what else stood out from this program? So both cohorts had a look at the different types of investment, so really leveraging off the Regen Farmers Mutual Landscape Impact Program and those learnings. So this included things such as concepts of vertical stacking, where multi-land use and different types of landscape and property interventions can be implemented on a property to maximise emerging opportunities. So, for example, not just considering an individual carbon project on a property, but also what it might look like down the track to stack that with a biodiversity market project or a potential other credit that might be emerging. The other concepts they also looked at in their investor sessions were things like horizontal stacking, which is really a familiar landcare model of a multi-landholder approach across a landscape, be it a riparian corridor or similar, where you can get improved impacts and benefits by having multiple landholders all stacked up next to each other doing a similar thing. And I guess the other thing that Claire touched on earlier in this process that's been quite a standout has been the fact that we've had both landholders participate on what they can do on property and their shared priorities for a landscape, but also bringing in a whole lot of other stakeholders that could really represent a shared priority for the network. So, as you can see, it's been quite an intensive process for both landscapes, and they've put in a lot of effort. So what better way to, I guess, look at next, showcasing what they've done. So I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Vanessa Melandrin from the Granite to Goulburn group, who was the landscape coordinator for that particular process, to give a bit of an overview of what they have achieved and their plan this year. So we'll just hand over control to Vanessa.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for introduction. Good evening, everyone. So I was the landscape coordinator for the Granite to Goulburn group, and we have some of the rest of the team here with us tonight. We have Janet Hagan and Peter Richardson, and 2 missing. So our design process went through multiple co-design sessions with stakeholders and the local community. Okay, here we are. So this is an example of our landscape, usually sunny, but can get also quite misty. This is a part of the landscape that it's in the highlands. And then we also have another part of the landscape that's on the flats, on the plains. So through all the co-design sessions and meetings we had, we distilled the landscape vision, 2.5 lines, just to say what is our long-term ambition for this landscape, which is also summarized in these pictures. And we would like to have a landscape with healthy and functioning waterways, profitable agriculture systems, and all of this operating in harmony with healthy country, which introduces also the cultural layer, which is quite important in our landscape. To achieve this, we have 3 strategies. One is based on profitable agriculture that has to be profitable on a long term and therefore sustainable. Landscape rehydration, as our landscape has lost the majority of its original wetlands that were found in pre-colonial times, and also protection of threatened species and ecosystems where they live. This is a brief summary. So to be able to do this, we have envisaged the creation of a hub, the Granite to Goulburn hub, which basically formalizes the existence of the network that we have formed as part of this year's project, but it's still an informal network. So basically the hub will provide coordination, facilitation, prioritize projects, engagement with the community, and engaging with the Pilot 10 and other landholders that are in our landscape. So basically these are all functions that usually a land care group does, but we can say they are amplified, brought to a higher level due to the landscape approach and due to the tapping into different sources of funding. So this brings us to the next slide, where we have the potential investors pools. So we've looked at different kinds of potential investors, one of them being government and philanthropic, which is quite familiar to the Landcare LVI and Landcare Australia. But we also looked at environmental markets, thanks to the project, to the learnings we had with the Region Farmers Mutuals and Andrew Ward. We've looked at supply chains and the local economy. For each one of these investors, we have a specific value proposition, because each investor has to see themselves, they have to see themselves in the proposition and see what's in it for them. That's very important. And usually as Landcare, we don't think about that, because we actually get projects through, let's say, LVI or other sources, and we don't think about the value proposition. And we have also drafted some priority projects that will span, let's say, 25 years, depending, but long-term projects that address the 3 strategies, let's say the 3 main areas that we want to focus on. So sustainable agriculture, rehydrating the landscape, and restoring ecosystems for threatened species. So here is a summary of the 7 projects that we have drafted, and the timeline for expected life of these projects. So to be able to do this, of course, we need to set up the Granite to Goulburn hub, securing some funding to make sure that we do this first step, then helping the landholders with their needs, different levels of needs, as you can see listed here. And one of them being simply aggregation and making possible for them to meet like-minded people. So this was actually one of the feedback that I received from the landholders. They were really enthusiastic to be able to meet people that think like them and have the same goals. As simple as that, as important as that. And after these first two steps, we will hopefully be able to close our first market transaction. So this is all from the Granite to Goulburn landscape. Here's an aerial view of our granite hills. And over back to you. Thank you.
Environmental problems don't stop at the property line. That's why Granite to Goulburn is bringing landholders and like-minded organisations to work together across our landscape. Together, we can ensure that agriculture is both sustainable and profitable. We can capture carbon, improve the health of our waterways, and protect our threatened species.
Cam Stewart here, and we're at Looking Glass Highlands, Dropmore Road. So we've had this property for about 10 years. It's about 1,400 acres. It's a self-replacing Angus cattle herd is what we run. We have about 200 cows. We try and produce about 190 calves a year. And we also run some wethers, some fine wool wethers. So we got involved in the G2G group because we'd been doing a lot of work with Landcare over a long period of time. We've also done work with the Catchment Management Authority, fencing off our waterways and planting trees.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm the co-owner of Looking Glass with Cam. We face challenges here, as do all other farmers, with climate change. So to address some of those issues, we are focused very much on regenerative farming, trying to improve the microbial activity in the soils, which will in turn grow better pasture, which in turn will grow better cows. We're trying to plant a lot of trees, both shelter belts and regenerating our landscape, to ensure that there's moisture retention and shelter. That is not just for our cattle and our sheep, but also for the biodiversity in the area.
We're here at Ben Acre, which is a 320 hectare farm at Loxley in the Longwood Plains. We run merino sheep and cross them with white Suffolk rams. 4 years ago, we switched to a more regenerative style of farming. It didn't take long before doing not a lot actually showed a significant improvement in our pasture, more importantly in our animal health.
And so when the opportunity came to join the Granite to Goulburn group, we thought it would be really interesting to work on a landscape type environment as opposed to just your own farm. So working with a group of local people this time was really interesting. It was good to actually meet some of the people that we hadn't met before. And there were also people from different areas, including down on the flats near the Goulburn, and people up here at Highlands. People with different sized farms, people with different backgrounds. So coming to this with a different perspective, which we think was really interesting. Ultimately, I think the objectives were very similar for the people that were involved in it. We're all interested in the environment, in biodiversity, improving the waterways, and just making the farms better.
Working together can be more impactful, both economically and environmentally, to keep our landscape healthy and thriving. If you're interested in joining the Granite to Goulburn as either a landholder or as an investor, or want to find out more, please email us on granitetogoulburn@gmail.com.
A huge thank you, Vanessa, and the Granite to Goulburn crew for sharing a little bit of your journey so far. And for everyone online, there is a full plan available that really is worth, I think, a pot of tea rather than a cup, and a nice sit down to really get through on some of that detail. So I'll now hand over to Marnie, who's going to share a little bit of the experience from Windharp Horizons. Over to you, Marnie.
Thanks, Claire. So we in the Bullack and Northern Grampians Landcare Network are situated in Central Victoria, or under the North Central Catchment Management Authority. And we were excited to undertake the New Futures project based on the size of our very unique landscape, which encompasses over 700,000 hectares and is just so different from one end to the other. So we were identifying like a grand scope of amazing projects that we could undertake as part of this landscape action plan. These are governed, the beginning of this project, we were governed by principles that would determine how we would approach these projects. And these principles included things like understanding the natural value of our landscape and looking at these remnant blocks of native vegetation, connecting the landscape across the entire Northern Grampians network for environmental benefit, but also for community benefit, for health of persons as individuals, as community members, and in relation to other people, which included, most importantly, connection to our traditional owners, the Dja Dja Wurrung. Like Vanessa, our process included collaborative design workshops with our facilitator, Lisa Adams. And in these, we were assisted to identify priorities of our stakeholders across the landscape and understanding that what we were trying to reflect was not just an environmental project or was not just an agricultural project. We were trying to enter into a market that was not limited by carbon or anything like that. We wanted to explore the natural value. So we started looking at things including seed collection or endangered species, which is why we named our project Windharp Horizons, which is regionally the Wimmera Windharp. And they're called those because when the wind blows through them, the bullock tree, they sing, which is sort of the romantic vision that we wanted to apply to this project. We identified 8 priority areas with projects that we'd like to look at. And these included things like grasslands, wetlands, biolinks, as well as community education, having a landcare hub, connection with the traditional owners, things like that, all in the way of connecting with our landscape and our community for greater benefit. And yeah, it's just generally, I chose not to present our video to you. I apologize, but it wasn't quite ready in the same way that our slideshow, it wasn't quite ready. And before we really present this, we had an image of a plains wanderer that just wasn't quite right. So I chose not to share it with you. But yeah, it's been a great opportunity, great learning opportunity. And we as a working team through this opportunity have been able to learn about our own region and build from what we know. And then with our partners and stakeholders, really understand what we don't know and what's needed and where we can stand to improve. So thank you.
Thank you, Marnie. And I will flag for everyone online that the Windharp crew just launched their plan on Sunday. So setting a webinar 2 days later was a pretty ambitious timeline to be able to get all their resources together. But Marnie, thank you. As always, you speak so eloquently about your community that you support. And I don't know, it's been an inspiration to watch you and your working group really step up as that next gen, taking stewardship of the network's big vision moving forward. Anthony, I think we're jumping over to wall 40. Is that correct?
Correct. So we've got lots of learnings from the program. So we'll hand over to Andrew Ward. So Wardy, who is from Regen Farmers Mutual and was one of the key project leads or project partner leads to help our landscapes sort through all amazing things. So Wardy's got some reflections on the program that he'll go through now.
Thanks, Anthony. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Marnie. Look, you'll get sick of me saying thank you, but it was really a gratifying experience the last couple of months working with Landcare Victoria. That's the first time we've done that. We also worked with ANU and Landscape Finance Lab. And so a lot of the reflections from the learnings of the program in this part of today's session are really for, well, what did we learn in running these two programs locally in G2G and Windharp Horizon that we didn't know when we started 12 months ago, discussing this as a partner consortium, and that might help us inform the next two landscape program designs so that they're even better. And so if you'll bear with me, Anthony, can you forward me a slide? I'll just talk you through what our role and what we kind of have learned from our role compared to where we thought we were. So we had done, I think, 5 landscape impact programs previous to working with the Windharp and G2G groups. And in those cases, we'd really only worked with farmer landholding stakeholders, and we'd been operating in a vacuum because we hadn't really engaged or had processes to engage with traditional owners, with the public landholders, be they the federal government, the state parks, forestry, or local government, and with private landholders who aren't farmers. And so this opportunity of working with Brooke in G2G and Lisa in Windharp Horizons to expand the set of stakeholders that could contribute to the vision, that form spheres of influence around the farmers whose decisions impact farmers right the way through to, if we don't have a strong, thriving local economy, the kids' schools that farmers go to are impacted. And so how multiple land use, how multiple landholders impacted farmers, and what we could learn as Regen Farmers Mutual was a key goal out of doing this for us as an organisation. And the learnings that we found, I think, were that, those other landholding groups have separate priorities and they have, therefore, similar land management units. They're in the same landscape, but then different strategies come out of the needs for those organisations based on their priorities compared to farmers. But if you've got an aligned vision, which is what I think both Windharp Horizon and G2G have done exceptionally well, is engage with people and articulate their vision, then I think it's better than what one singular type of landholder, i.e. the farmers, could do on their own. I guess some of the other things that we learned was that the environmental markets, we had hoped, being that they're long dated, 25 years for a sort of carbon project, that farmers who self-nominate to be in a program like this are typically, keen to engage or already have engaged in practices that make economic and environment sense. We thought going into this that environmental markets might, result in quite a number of transactions in each region and potentially provide the local land care networks with services that they could add to those transactions that would be of value sufficient that local land care networks, in addition to their good bread and butter historic capacities at acquiring grants, could add another pool of capital. I guess what we found though was that the scale for environmental markets in both of these regions wasn't there, and for slightly different reasons. The scale of farms in Windharp is sufficient that you could, in theory, find 20 hectares at about 5% of a total farm, but the cost of moving that out of crop production, and not just in terms of the immediate costs, but also what it might do to valuations and food and sovereignty and a whole bunch of other things within that market. You'd actually be competing against the supply chain who use that area as a supply shed. The reasons Windharp didn't find environmental market transactions around property value, around maturity of the grains market compared to the beef market when it comes to sustainability reporting, were different to the reasons in the G2G, which were more to do with the size of landholder and the capacity to undertake CER registered type projects, which are the high integrity ones, because at sub 20 hectares, which represented quite a significant portion of private property, you barely pay for the cost of fences, let alone provide get out of bed money or incentive to the landholder. And so for different reasons, environmental markets weren't what we thought they would be. So, Anthony, could you move to the next page, please? I guess what we've found is that the biodiversity markets are too immature. We suspect that they're forming, consensus around metrics in early 2025, mechanisms in 2026, 27, and that they will become what you could call a market for biodiversity around 2028. In the meantime, you're left with carbon markets, which, as we described, aren't really relevant for either Windharp or G2G because of the size of landholding or the cost of opportunity cost of land use. And therefore, I guess, what we're looking for is either reduced costs of administering projects or a significantly higher price for carbon credits before it makes economic sense for farmers, landholders generally, to engage with carbon markets primarily. But I do think it's been a fantastic process because of the big learning we got is that, there are 4 pools of capital, and I don't think we as partner organisations, as Regen Farmers Mutual, had been able to articulate these pools of capital sufficiently and what drives them. But there are environmental markets. We've just talked about carbon and biodiversity and the emerging nature of them, and they could become relevant, certainly in the next 5 years as the Australian Sustainability Reporting Standard, as the safeguard mechanism, as that sort of gap between supply and demand emerges. There are going to be opportunities in environmental markets for landholders. The grants and philanthropic. So you've got grants coming from local government, state government, federal government. You've got grants coming from philanthropic organisations, and Landcare Victoria and these Landcare networks are in a very strong position now that they've articulated what is special about their landscape. What are the priorities for investment in the landscape? How can those things be spread and supported locally? So the public good opportunities in the bread and butter world of philanthropic and grants funding for these groups is much improved. Moving to supply chains, in 2025 and increasingly so, the supply chains that draw commodities from these regions are going to need to report on carbon emissions and impact on biodiversity, how their business will adjust given, a 2-degree temperature change. And actually for those supply chains to have local entities with which they can negotiate and discuss, what are the priorities in your region? How can we support you to produce these? What are the things that supply chains need to do to make sure business as usual in a 2-degree climate can work? And who do they negotiate with? Both of these groups have set themselves up to engage with supply chains in a increasingly interesting and potentially financially rewarding way. And then both of these organizations identified, farmer to fork kind of direct consumer markets are potentially interesting. Value chain coordination, bringing in local input providers, bringing in things like Seeding Victoria so that farmers can, not only benefit from the remnant vegetation, but create a business model that fits in with their cereal production business model in Windharp was a great example of that. Looking at multiple land use, investigating whether land can be used for food and fibre production, but as well as for renewable energy or mineral sands or other opportunities. And basically we think that, the improvement that will come in natural capital and resilience in that landscape drives new business opportunities. And they might be more like tourism and agri-tourism, ecotourism in G2G, given its proximity to the Hume Highway, to Melbourne. And it might be more like seed collection businesses in Windharp. But in both cases, these 4 pools of capital represent new ways in which Landcare networks can support themselves and their landholders to achieve material environmental impacts. And so for Regen Farmers Mutual's perspective, we've learned heaps. We're looking forward to integrating that into the next 2 processes and working with Landcare Victoria again in 2025. And so thank you, everyone. Personally, had a fat time. Awesome. Loved it.
Thank you, Wardy. It's always a pleasure to hear you talk. And I'm just going to remind people that if you want to ask a question, you can type it into the Q&A box. And if you don't have some questions from that presentation, I will fall off my chair. So please don't be shy. Pop them in there so that we can answer them at the end. So I'm just going to hand over to Anthony, who's going to talk us through, well, this is the first run, but what does that mean for the next 2 landscapes that we do have funding for in 2025? Over to you, Anthony.
Thank you, Claire. So Wardy gave a good overview of some of the stuff that we've learnt. And I guess some of the key takeaways for Landcare Victoria from our first 2 pilot landscapes was really around centering the landscape plan and the vision process as the priority for the networks. The intensity of the pilot 1 process was quite, a lot of workload. So ways that we can reduce that so that it's more facilitated and targeted in the round 2 in terms of the activity delivery. And really making sure that we do draw on the experts to develop a working knowledge of what works in a landscape. So acknowledging that the 2 working groups that provided leadership in each of these landscapes have learnt an amazing amount of things, but they won't be necessarily experts in all the different pillars that will be required to really, complete their landscape action plan vision, as you've seen by some of the very interesting content that Wardy has articulated there. There's a lot to learn in this space. And so it's been quite a learning curve as well, I guess. So with that in mind, we will be launching a round 2 program for the New Futures project. So I guess the round 2 will remain a collaborative process of landscape planning. So really support from Landcare Victoria and the project partners to deliver a landscape action plan in 2 additional landscapes. So really facilitating that multi-stakeholder engagement process and exploring different types of capital and investment options that might be available to deliver that particular landscape action plan. So it's similar parameters to the previous round. So there is a $50,000 direct network funding to employ a landscape coordinator and run the workshops, and some honorarium support for the volunteer working group members who help provide that leadership throughout the process. And then I guess on top of that, additionally, the landscapes and the partnership team will provide the support and service delivery through the workshop facilitation support, one-on-one support with Landcare Victoria to deliver the program, and also ongoing support to, capture the learnings and that sort of thing with ANU as well. So, and all that, I guess, means that the package of, you know, it's a 50K direct grant, but the package of delivery from and support from the partnership team would be probably in excess of $100,000 in additional support to those networks. So round 2, we aim to have release the application form for expressions of interest by mid-December. So EOIs will look in February on the 21st. So it's quite a long, we're aware that we're going into Christmas, but that people might have wanted some additional time over summer perhaps to chip away at things and also get a few ducks lined up in a row by sort of mid to late February to submit their EOIs. So keep an eye out for that official release. The form, the application will be tweaked to look slightly different from round 1, which is basically incorporating some of the learnings from the first 2 pilots, and also just the EOI in program 1. We had a couple of tech difficulties and those things, so we'll be updating the form to make it easier to use. And we will also, I guess, from round 1 applicants who applied but were unsuccessful, we will require some supplementary information. There's a few tweaks to the form from those networks who applied for round 1. So I'll be in touch directly with those networks who applied about whether they want to apply again, whether they're interested and want to either do a whole new form or just provide that supplementary information. So Landcare networks and collectives can still apply. The lead applicant must be a current financial member of Landcare Victoria Incorporated at the time of applying. So when the EOIs close in February next year, make sure that you've had your 2024 census completed and that you're an up-to-date member. And yeah, we will still, I guess there'll be a one-on-one support period where you can make bookings with myself in February as well, in those sort of couple of week period in February. So you can discuss your application. And then those who proceed to the shortlist will be interviewed in early March with a couple of our project partners. So just a quick reminder about what we're seeking. So similar parameters to round 1. We have learnt a bit more, as has been articulated, so there will be some changes. So for example, for round 1, we were suggesting a sort of open / broad diversity of landholders for the pilot 10 landholders in your landscapes to explore, I guess, the opportunities. For round 2, Landcare networks will need to indicate that the majority of their landholders do have a productive agriculture farmer lens or a significant scale to their property that for the prospective projects such as environmental plantings, which is really to help optimize the likelihood of an initial transaction in that landscape. If you've got any questions about that, let me know. But otherwise, it really is sort of demonstrating that you have a track record in projects, that you're starting to think outside the box in terms of other opportunities in your landscape that might bring in investment or funding, sort of a clear idea of your vision and sort of what the strategic objective of having a landscape action plan might be, and sort of access to stakeholders and different farmers in your community. So with that, we'll provide some opportunity to have some questions from the chat.
Thank you, Anthony. I know that's a lot of information. So I guess Anthony is available if you have questions about the EOI process, noting that everyone at Landcare Victoria is knocking off on the 19th of December. Hopefully you are too, for a couple of weeks break, and he'll then kick in again from the 6th of January. So there's a couple of questions here, but please, just a reminder, if there's anything that's come up that you do want an answer to tonight, just pop it into the Q&A function rather than the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them. So as you can see, hopefully, maybe not, it might just be my talking face that you can see, but hopefully you can see there's a whole panel here of people who have been part of this process, and it only represents a small portion of those who've travelled along these pilot landscape kind of development processes. So I'm going to ask Andrew Borg, who is part of the Bullock and Northern Grampians Landcare Network, to unmute himself and hopefully answer a question here that we've got from Julie. So Andrew, just press mute for 1 more minute. Thank you. Sorry, that was a little bit of feedback loop. So Julie's really interested in asking about the way that the seed collection activities have worked in your project, and what were some of the surprise benefits, or looking to where it might go, what that might they be for the participants, and what are the challenges that might be involved in that part of your plan?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I'll apologise now if I do have a dodgy connection. Hopefully you can hear me okay. In terms of the seed project, it became one of our actual projects that we wanted to highlight as we developed our action plan. In all the discussions we had with all the partners, the biggest issue was the fact that we wouldn't have enough plants to do all the work we wanted in terms of biolinks, and that somewhere along the line we needed to do something about that. So we highlighted the fact that seed collection is vital. Out of that, we formed a really good partnership with Seeding Victoria, who have already started us on the path of meeting our project aims. In terms of the surprises, I suppose what surprised me more than anything was the quick uptake of partners when we started to formulate different visions, and especially with things like seed collection. We had people contacting us, and that's something that is still happening as we go along. So that was a surprise to me, how quickly the word got out about Windharp, and about how quickly people started wanting to jump on board with things like seed collection. So in terms of our project strategy, what we'd really like to do, apart from just educating and getting volunteers trained up with seed collection, is actually developing a satellite seed bank and everything up this way to help Seeding Victoria for the longer term.
Thank you, Andrew. And Seeding Victoria, you can jump on their website and have a little look. They're actually a really great initiative that could support landcare groups and networks across the state. So worth a little look-see, and also a conversation if you're interested in finding out more. So we've got a couple of other questions here. I'm going to lift Louise's up, which is a question about what is the minimum property size required? And I think you might be asking about the sort of 10 farmer advocates who run through this process, and what that might need to be. So Wardy, I know we've had a bit of a partnership conversation about it. Hopefully you've got an answer that you're happy to speak to, and if not, I'll hand it over to Anthony, who can jump in as well.
In environmental plantings, you're looking at sort of 20 hectares or more that you'd want to see. And typically that's sort of 5% of a farm and not more than that. So doing the maths on that, you're looking at 1,000 hectare kind of farm in order to get 20 hectares of environmental plantings. If you were looking at something like a soil carbon project, you could probably look at the productive area of being 500 hectares or more, and it would be profitable to do so. If you were a non-productive landholder, like a private landholder, without stock or crops, or you know, you might, if you know, something along the lines of 20% is what of a farm is what private landholders tend to do with Trust for Nature. And that would mean you're sort of 80 to 100 hectares of size in order to make 20 hectares work at sort of 1/4 to 20% of the total land area. So, you know, that's the sort of rough figures. Clearly it'll be agriculturally driven. You know, the further west and the drier it gets, the bigger the properties tend to get, and the higher the rainfall and the higher productive capacity, you know, the smaller the properties seem to get.
Thanks, Wardy. And Peter, who is one of the working group from the Granite to Goulburn network, has his hand up, so I'm going to let him have a little bit of an addition to that question. Over to you, Peter.
Oh, thanks, Claire. Just a thought to get rid of my hand. Just a thought. Wardy's right in the sense of the properties that would want to go ahead with a carbon transaction certainly want to be on the larger end of that scale, or alternatively, they need to look at more sophisticated aggregation type arrangements. But and I think that in Granite to Goulburn, we did suffer from having not enough of those larger landholders that could help us to drive some transactions with that I think we will be able to enable in the near term, but weren't out of the 10 landholders in the group. But having said that, I do think it's really important to have diversity in the group. And so I think it was quite valuable having some small landholders involved in the group as well, because it's really bringing all of those perspectives together that what gives you a really powerful and all-encompassing landscape plan. So I wouldn't be sort of trying to impose some minimum size for all 10 of the participants in a prospective project. I think you do want to find a bit of a balance. We were probably a bit under, but you also wouldn't want to be a bit over. So just a thought.
Thank you, Peter. And I just want to offer Anthony a chance to talk about what we're looking for in the space of the next round in terms of that landholder scale and size. Anthony?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, it's hard to give a one answer thing, but I think if the majority of your pilot 10 that you're indicating that you're getting sort of canvassing with are productive farmers, then it doesn't really matter I don't think what the size is. Like, you know, if it's a productive farm, it's going to be a certain size to make it worth anyway. And then, so maybe it's something like a 7-3 split where you've got, you know, a good chunk of productive farmers plus some either, you know, lands, private landholders who have either hobby farm or a not agricultural productive property, but it's big enough to start to chew the fat and look at some particular opportunities, I guess. But yes, a little bit of diversity, but I guess that's probably a decent indication of what would be looked at favourably, I think. Thank you,
Anthony. And Louisa has noted that some areas of Victoria have a lot of smaller landholders, which we're aware of. So there's still value in this process that we're going through in terms of a landscape scale approach to be able to consider. In the next 2 iterations, I guess we are starting to look for a test of a slightly different ilk. These first 2 pilots we went through were looking for real diversity of landholders, as Wardy and Peter have spoken to be able to test what those opportunities are. And having those learnings in those landscapes now allows the network to target particular landholder opportunities as they recruit their next tranche of potentially interested landholders locally to be part of that shared vision. So there's a really great question here from Andrea, and Jana, I'm just going to offer you an opportunity, but Vanessa, you as well, to speak to kind of the process itself, and would you have been able to develop this landscape scale plan for your area without this funding and program? What were some of the biggest hurdles that this opportunity allowed you to clear in terms of creating a plan of this scale? So what has it brought to play that might not have been there beforehand?
Go, Vanessa. Oh, well.
We just got you on mute.
I'll answer it instead. Vanessa's gone away.
Unmute yourself. Okay. Is it good? Yeah. Yeah, I read the question beforehand, so I had time to think about it. Thank you, guys. I think, first of all, we were not just a group of, you know, an informal network that came together. We had the backing of LVI, Region Farmers Mutual. We had the Australian National University Sustainable Farms, which is represented today here by Michelle Younger and Wardy for Region Farmers Mutuals. And therefore, we had a substantial backing behind us that made us look more reliable. It wasn't just us saying, hi, we have an idea and would like to do this. And probably that wouldn't have attracted the same attention and the same commitment, you know. So this showed that there was, that we had, you know, groups behind us, like the Ian Potter Foundation, as we mentioned before, the Nature Conservation Trust. So there was a substantial investment in this project. So it means there's all the intention to make it work, right? So I think it's the officiality, if I can use this word, yeah. So it allowed us, which obstacles, which hurdles. I think that one of the biggest hurdles was to create a vision. Like we've summarized the vision in 2.5 lines, but to get there, you have to talk to a lot of people, you have to discuss things, you have to reach some sort of agreements. And it might seem very simple. At the end, you think, well, of course, this is the vision, but you got to get there. You got to go through a process. And the whole journey, we were guided by, you know, Wardy, and we had to find our path. So it's not like you know where you're going at the beginning. You don't know. So you need to be guided through, and you need the support of these other institutions that I mentioned before. So I think, at least for me, this was a hurdle, because the vision is created, the goals, the strategies, all of this, the plan. There's been so much collaboration behind it, like even to create a plan like this. And then not only to have the plan, but to go beyond the plan, because you can have a plan, but then can live in the drawer, right? If you want to add something, Janet, I might have taken too much time already.
Janet, I popped you on mute, so you'll have to unmute again if you want to have a little say.
Sorry. Yes, so the process was quite grueling, really. It took a long time. Like it took nearly 30 weeks of 3 hours per week Zooming with each other. And we would never have got round to doing it just in our normal day-to-day Landcare Network business to get this plan finished. We had deadlines that forced us to complete a plan and complete a video and go way outside our comfort zones and produce something that we're really, really proud of, that we wouldn't have done normally. We would have said, we'll do it next year, or we'll do it next week, or something like that. So it really pushed us beyond our comfort zones and made us produce something of quality that we're really proud of. So that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you, Janet. And you've taken us to 6:30 p.m. But I'm conscious there's still more questions that we haven't got to. So Hannah, jump onto our website. We've got information about setting up Landcare groups and what minimum standards you need, or email us at info@landcarevictoria.org.au. Andrea, no, there definitely is value for smaller landholders and collective action. And yes, it really is an interesting opportunity that we can present through the New Futures program. So there's some very quick answers. I will just want to reiterate that this process would not have been possible without the amazing contribution above and beyond any funding that they have been provided from that partnership team. So Michelle Young, a huge thank you to you and the team at Sustainable Farms, ANU Sustainable Farms. Wardy and Rowan, a huge thank you to you guys at Regen Farmers Mutual. And Les, who's on the call today, is a funder, representing a funder from the Natural Resources Conservation Trust, but also has travelled this program as a core partner, bringing amazing insights and support to the program as it's found its feet, and then hopefully a model that can be supported across multiple landscapes in Victoria. And then our fourth partner, the Landscape Finance Lab, who have really helped push our thinking as a partnership team to that global stage and the opportunities around the 30 by 30 targets that have been presented. So again, a huge thank you to the funders who trusted us enough to let us go on this wild ride. And again, to our amazing first two landscapes who have followed through and delivered something that is truly impressive.